When you want to install Google Analytics 4 on your website, you get two options. Either use Google Tag Manager or gtag. But which option should you choose? What are the differences? In this video, I will explain all of that. Hey, my name is Julius and welcome to the Analytics Mania YouTube channel, where I teach how to work with Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. And if you want to stay up to date with GA4, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are two options how you can install Google Analytics 4 on a website, and you can see them in the settings of your web data stream. It's either with Google Tag Manager or Global Site Tag, which is also known as gtag. To understand the differences, first we need to get familiar with what these two options are. gtag is a unified tracking code that some of the Google's products use. For example, Google Analytics or Google Ads. This is a tracking code that Google asks you to add directly to the source code of the website. In the past, every Google's product had a separate tracking code. For example, Google Ads was using conversion.js, Universal Analytics was using analytics.js. To unify this, Google later released a global site tag, a tracking code that can be edited to activate multiple Google's products. For example, here you have a Universal Analytics tracking code, and if you want to activate Google Ads tracking, your developer can add a single line of code right here. But that is pretty much it. If you want your developers to also install other tracking code, for example, Twitter Pixel, then they would need to add one more tracking code that is not related to gtag. And every time you need some additional configuration, for example, maybe you need an additional event to track, you would then have to go to your developers and ask them to do so in the code. This is very time consuming. That is where Google Tag Manager joins the game and becomes far more useful. After Google Tag Manager is installed on a website, it allows you to manage various tracking codes from the single interface. Quite often, you won't even need developers' help for that. With GTM, you can install, edit, and remove Google and non-Google tracking codes. So if you want to fire a certain tracking code after a form was submitted, you can do that on your own. By the way, if you want to learn how to get started with Google Tag Manager, I have a tutorial about this on my channel. You will find the link to that below the video. So, what are the differences between Google Tag Manager and gtag? Google Tag Manager is a tool that lets you fairly easily manage tracking codes on a website. gtag is one of those tracking codes. So if you want to install Google Analytics by yourself, you can do that with Google Tag Manager. But if your website's tracking setup is managed only by developers, then gtag usually is the option. Google Tag Manager has a user-friendly interface that lets you manage those tracking codes in a single place. With gtag, you have to either deal with the plain code by yourself, or you have to ask developers to do so. You might have seen some blog posts or videos where gtag is compared to GTM. Sometimes gtag is even called a mini GTM, but that is far from truth. In reality, they are very different. It's like apples and oranges. Google Tag Manager gives you flexibility, and you can add various tracking codes by yourself, even if those codes are provided by other companies like Facebook. And gtag is just a tracking code that supports several Google's products. So if you ask me which option to choose to install Google Analytics, I always recommend using Google Tag Manager. It is more flexible, more powerful, and gives more control to marketers and analysts. Below this video, I will share a link to a tutorial that will show you how to install Google Analytics with Google Tag Manager. There are not many reasons to use plain gtag. The first one is if your company is very strict and your developers are against tag managers. Well, they are partially true because marketers can add some malicious tracking codes with Google Tag Manager without even knowing that. And those codes might break the functionality of the website. But there are built-in tools in Google Tag Manager that can help your developers to control the entire process and avoid such problems. For example, marketers can have limited permissions in GTM. The company may adopt a more thorough testing process, or the company may implement block lists that prevent certain types of tracking codes to be implemented on a site. Another reason to use gtag is if your company already has a very extensive gtag setup and the migration to GTM cannot be justified due to budget limits. So if your company already relies a lot on gtag, you might want to continue using that. But in the long run, I would still highly recommend migration to Google Tag Manager. So I hope that this explanation has cleared things up. Now, for the end of this video, I wanted to share several additional quick tips. Since gtag is the tracking code and GTM is meant to manage those tracking codes, how exactly should you install gtag? Should you use custom HTML tag? Or should you use the default Google Analytics 4 tag template? In my opinion, always use the built-in tag templates. Google is updating them and makes sure that they continue to work. If you use gtag with custom HTML tag, you will be responsible for maintaining those codes and making sure that they continue to work in case Google changes something. So it is highly recommended that you install GA4 with a dedicated GA4 tag template. Technically, gtag will work with custom HTML tag as well, but it is very easy to mess things up. If you have a hard-coded gtag setup for Universal Analytics and you're using Google Tag Assistant Chrome extension to test this, you will see 2 rows of the same Universal Analytics tracking ID. Now, don't worry about that because this is normal. When gtag is used for Universal Analytics, it additionally loads an older version of the tracking code called analytics.js. That is why you will see the second row. Can I use Google Tag Manager on a website if the hard-coded gtag snippet is already installed? Well, technically, yes. You can have installed Google Analytics with GTM and also with gtag. But just make sure that these 2 setups are not tracking the same things. Otherwise, you will have duplicate data. For example, if Add to Cart clicks are already tracked with gtag, don't implement that tracking in Google Tag Manager. In the long run, it is highly recommended that you fully migrate to Google Tag Manager and install Google Analytics with it. I explained this migration process in great detail in my Google Tag Manager course for beginners. I will post a link to that course below the video. So, to sum up, if you're working on a new project and you want to have flexibility with your tracking codes, always use Google Tag Manager to install Google Analytics. If you want to learn how to do that, take a look at the description. If you found this video useful, you hit the thumbs up button below the video because it helps me continue working on this channel. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics 4, then consider subscribing to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.